Welcome back to my channel Conquer the Fear. In this video we are going to discuss about one of the interview questions asked in Nagarro company. So the person attended this particular interview and it was a round 1. So basically he got a package of 27 LPA. So where he was asked different questions about Java, Spring Boot, microservices and SQL. So I'm going to explain each and every questions line by line, what exactly was the questions and how to answer those. Now if you go to any interview, the very first question is about tell me about yourself. Now this is one of the important questions because this is going to explain about your experience, what kind of work have you done and how much contribution you have given to the company or the organization. So the interviewer is not just asking about to get to know about yourself, they are trying to get an information at the very start, how capable you are, what kind of contribution you have done, whether you are really valuable assets, and if I can hire you or not. So that's the things which they will try to get that information from that one single question. So make sure you are well prepared for this and you prepare this for more than any times of this, because this is the first going to be the impression where this is the first question would be asked up and you have to nail it there itself. Second, you have to explain about your project architecture. Now this is an in general second questions. A sequence after the tell me about yourself is generally asked to know about what kind of live projects have you worked on, what kind of technology stack you have used, and what is the architecture of that particular project. Now they would like to understand whether the role you are applying and the tech stack what you have applied is relevant to what their expectation is about. If that is matching, and also it might happen that sometimes they accept an exceptional candidate because they have different stack, but it wholly depend, it has to match up that and then the expectation of the client and the company. So make sure you answer this in a pretty better way so that you explain them in detail so that they will understand that you are not just writing to code something, you are knowing your project well enough. Now what is the version you have worked in Java? So as you must be already knowing, Java has gone through various cycle of version revamps, like from starting from 1 till date. If you see, there are 24 versions which is going to be running on 2025 as of now. If you look at this, there has been several versions and several features has been introduced. So make sure if you are going for attending any interview, you should be aware of all the features. The interviewer might suddenly ask you, tell me the features about Java 8, or tell me the features about Java 11, 17, 21, 24. So you should be very handy on those particular features, and also not only the theoretical aspect, you should be able to answer the practical aspect of it, because any features which we are going to learn, it has got two things basically: why it was introduced, what problem it solves, right? Based on that the features are introduced. So you need to clearly understand what was prior life of that, and what is the feature after it has been introduced, what is it is made. So you need to have a clear picture, clear answer of that. Now depends on your interview and the company, the questions might be different, but generally any interview that goes with Java, it has to start from the basics of Java. So he might go up to any questions which are up to like from OOPS to any design patterns and other stuff, but make sure you prepare yourself on that part. Now in this case, the person was asked what is the difference between the find first and the find any. Now if you are aware, these are part of Java 8 streams API. So you need to understand what is the difference between them in order to answer this. Now as we know, this is part of Java stream. So these are two terminal operations which is used for Java streams to return an optional which is going to contain some elements, or either it is going to contain some empty. Now let us discuss about the differences, which is going to be about regarding how what elements it is going to return, especially when you are dealing with parallel stream. Now streams are both, one is the normal stream and one is the parallel stream, which is going to be when you are using the multi-threading. But if you see the first, it is going to guarantee the order. Now it is when you are trying to order some streams that is going, let's say you have linked list or list. Now it is going to call the find first, which will always find the first element according to the stream that is he has encountered on it. Now it is going to be the sequence process, so it is very straightforward and efficient over there. While when you are dealing with parallel stream, there is little bit performance impact, because we are trying to first encounter the order first, and then you're trying to potentially negate some scenarios of using the parallel stream over here. So let's say you want to find, or when you want the order of elements is going to matter for you, and then especially if you are using the first element as per the stream, then at the defined order you want this particular thing, then you can use first finds first. Now I have given you an example over here. If you see, now I wanted a find first example. If you see, take it, I have an array list over here. I am trying to convert it into a stream, and then I'm trying to filter out with all the elements or the names which are starting with letter A. Now if you see here, there are only one of them which is satisfying this condition. And if it is, now if you see in the, it is going to be the sequence, it is going to come from here, and see it is going to first find out this element and print that. Now in this case it is going to be Elias, because this is the only, but if there was another one, it could have ignored that part, because it will find that and then it will return that. Now this is how you get that. Now let's say when you're working with the parallel stream, what will happen when you are dealing with a simple array list where you have a parallel stream? First you have to sort this. In this case you did not have to sort this, but you had to sort it over here, and then after sorting you have to call this particular. So this is kind of a little bit overhead, or if you are trying to there is an extra step involved over here when you are dealing with parallel stream. So the output would be definitely kind of similar, but you will see that this is going to return an optional. Now find any is going to used when there is no order of the guaranteed of the elements are stored up, or how to use that. But it is going to return any element that is going to first satisfy that particular condition in the pipeline. So this is very well optimized and designed for parallel stream, since it does not going to guarantee the order. So there are different threads which are going to work on it, and it is going to return the very first element which they encounter. So this is quite faster, because threads are going to look out in a different and their own thread, and the moment they find it out, they will return it. Now when it comes to sequential threads, it is going to behave little bit like a find first only, because it is simply going to pick the first element in that sequence only, in that similar. However, when you're dealing with the sequential, it is not recommended to use this any element over there. So whenever you need any element of that stream that is going to meet your criteria, and the specific order identity is not going to matter anything, right? In that case, it is going to, we can use this. Now let's take an example. If you see here, Apple is there. This is again an array list. Now I've converted this over here. If the moment it finds over here, if the length is going to be greater than this, the any of this particular element it is going to first find, it is going to return over here. So this is how it is going to return it. Now when you're dealing with parallel stream, it might happen that array list over here. Now this is going to run it in the for loop, and then you will see there are different things over here. Now you see now I have written this in the for loop to understand if it is running thrice or 5 times, you see the order would be little bit different, because it is running in the parallel stream. So the output could be any of them, like 60, 70, or potentially 80, because in each run it is going to run in a different parallel stream, and each thread might find a different element first. It's not going to be in the sequential order. So that's the difference when you're dealing with first and find any. Now this is quite important because this is one of the basics of Java 8 streams, and you need to be well aware of it. Then comes, like the stream transformation. Now this is quite important question, because when you're dealing with maps and transformation, so when you're trying to convert from one object to another object with the help of Java streams, this is quite important. Now interviewer try to understand what is the difference between map and the flat map. Now when you are dealing with flat map or a map, then you are trying to transform from one object to another object, or one kind to another kind, but you are performing some operation on top of that. Now let's take an example. The map, let's say, so it is going to be a single one-to-one transformation. Let's say you have 10 numbers. Now on each of that particular number you are going to perform that particular operation on each element. So this is the map. But when you are dealing with flat map, you can convert that one single element to many of them. It can be used for flattening to a normal, from the nested list to a single list, where you can have a scenario where you have a list, and under that particular list there are different set of lists over there. So what you can do, you can flatten it up to a single array list or a map, whatever it is, into single, where earlier it was different inside. So nested one, you can convert it to a flatted list. Now if you see here, apple is there, over here dog and everything is there. Now this is going to flat map. So what exactly it is trying to do, it is going to convert that stream, it is going to split that thing over here. Now you see, this is going to be an array list, which is going to be converted based on this. Now this is going to split it into two, and then it is going to print that. So in this way there is going to be a single, this thing will be splitted into two of them, and same is applicable for here. Let's say there was another space over here, then it could have been printed splitted with that. Now let's take a live example. Now if you see here, this is going to be the example of map here, because let's say I have 1 2 3 4 1, I want to perform the square of it. So what I have to do, on each of this particular element I have to multiply it by itself, the number what we have. So in that case I'm trying to make use of map. So this is going to convert it to that particular thing, and it is going to return as a list over here. So in this is going to return as the same number of elements which were there. So the number of elements would be there with the square number over there. But when it comes to flat map, it is going to return you can have a list of let's say sentences written over here. Now in this case, what I'm trying to do, I'm trying to first map that particular sentences. I'm going to split this now, okay, in this case, and then I'm trying to flatten it to a stream over here. So this is going to convert from one stream to many stream over here, and it is going to flatten it. So ultimately it is going to return a lot of words over here. So all the words would be printed into single list now. So that's the difference. So as I mentioned, it is going to use for one-to-one transformation, the map. Now each element is going to be an input stream, which is going to do some functionality, it is going to return some output, and this can be changed from, like you want to convert from string to integer, integer to string, or integer to integer, or double, what kind of other things you can do. So number of elements would definitely remains the same over here. Now with flat map, it is going to be, when you want this particular each elements to be transferred, like it can be 0 elements or it can be more than one element, it depends on you, but it will be giving you a merged flatten into a single stream. So now this is going to be returning a stream over here. It can be either array, collection, that would be converted into a stream again. Now when we say flat map, it is going to flatten it, so each individual stream would be produced by each mapping into one combination of stream over there. So it will be combined into a single thing, So the number of element can be changed at the end, at the end of the result. It can either increase or it can have multiple of them to be produced for single output. So that can depend. Now when it comes to the Java basics and to the code, the question was asked about what is JIT compiler. Now what exactly a JIT compiler is? It is called just-in-time compiler. Now what is exactly it is used? It is used to convert the byte stream to the native machine code, where the machine can understand and execute the set of instruction at the runtime itself. So in this case, it is not going to happen at the compile time. At the runtime only, at that particular moment only, it is going to run that particular code at the runtime for you. So in this case, what it is going to happen, it is going to significantly improve your compilation. That is, where you have to do frequently, compile that particular code wherever it was there, and it will be run up. So in that case, it is quite efficient over here, and it is going to be more performance enabled. So why do we use this? Because in this is going to be the primary reason, because it is going to improve your performance over here. Now the compiler is going to convert the byte code into a native machine at the runtime which I mentioned. So this is going to be much more faster, as it is going to directly interpret it over there, and you can apply those optimization on the code itself. So which is going to be very frequently executed. That part will be very much executed in a very efficient way. Now definitely you will have questions with respect to memory management. So after and prior to Java 8, there is a significant difference when it comes to the memory management concepts and how it has been used. So there were PermGen, which was prior to Java 8, and after Java 8 there was an introduction of metaspace. We will discuss what exactly the difference is about. So the interviewer might ask you, what is the difference between PermGen and the metaspace? So can you tell me the difference about it and which version it was introduced? Now when it comes to PermGen, this is going to be a fixed size of memory area, where it was between the JVM's heap memory. So it was completely managed by the JVM. Now this is going to be very fixed. So it is going to always, it used to happen that it used to happen the out of memory exception over there. So it was the maximum size had to be configured at the start of your application. So you need to have that particular defined. Now if your application is loaded with lot of classes, your application is doing lot of servers are there, lot of deployment, then this can be easily hit that particular limit, and it is going to lead that particular out of memory exception. Now in this, the PermGen space is not been properly sized up, and also it is very difficult to tune and manage it over there. Now that's the reason, that was the problem. Hence it come up with the solution of PermGen, where it was completely replaced the PermGen with the metaspace. So the metaspace came in picture, where after Java 8 onwards, so it is going to dynamically grow the native memory. So it is much more flexible. Now it is going to rely on the operating system's native memory and not on the JVM's memory over there. That is called the heap memory. Now it is going to grow dynamically whenever there is a native memory available, and you can actually configure the upper limit over there, but it is going to significantly reduce your out of memory exceptions which were there. Now if you must have noticed recently, you won't see much of out of memory exception being occurring as to priorly when you used to run those particular program prior to Java 8. So this is the significant improvement which has been done in part of the JVM and internal memory management. It is quite flexible. Now there was a coding interview question asked. Now this is a definite question. You expect this question to be coming. One or other questions is definitely there. In some interview cases, it happens that the interview starts itself with the coding interview question. So make sure you nail that, and also you answer it in a pretty better way, so that now interviewer might not always expect a clear output. He might want to understand whether you are capable of solving this particular problem. It might happen that problem is little bit complex, but he wanted to understand what's the approach you're going to use, or what time complexity, or what is your approach to this particular question, right? So in that case, you need to be pretty aware of it and answer in that context. Now here the question was given that there is a list of strings, and that it wanted to him to be grouped by that particular length and the number of count that has occurred in the string. Now let's say if you see dog over here, it has occurred only one time over here, but if you see cat, also it has occurred for one time over here. Now the moment it finds the elements which are greater than 1, now it has to count that particular element over there. So in this case, you have to check out that how many times it has been appeared. Now there are two approaches to it. Basically, it might, you can define this using the Java 8 approach, or we can actually use it with the help of a normal Java stream approach. So in this case, if you take a look at this, I have converted into a stream, and then I'm trying to grouping it by. So this is the actual Java 8 methodology where we are using this particular grouping by. Now that grouping by has to happen on the length, and then it is going to collect that particular count over here. So as we wanted the length and the count of how many times it has occurred, so that is what the expectation, so we can do that. So for each of this, you can actually get the length and you can print it. Okay, now if you take a look at this without this, so I would convert it into a stream, I would grouping by the length and then counting over here. So this is without the lambda expression over here. Now exception handling is quite important topic. You will definitely have some practical scenario based questions or confusion questions which the interviewer might ask you. Now in this case, he wanted to understand what are the different ways to handle the exception in your application. So he wanted to understand whether you are aware of the basics or not. So he asked this particular question. Now if you look at this, it is going to be you can answer this like, there is a different try catch block which you can use to handle that. You can actually have a throws keyword defined for the method. Then you can normally throw your exception using the throw statement, or you can define your own custom exception using by extending the exception class or an runtime exception class. Now you can also deal with the global handler, where you will, when you're dealing with Spring Boot application, you can use this @controller advice, where in any part of your application the exception handle occurs, it is going to be handled at one central location, and we can make use of the @exception and handler method for each of these particular custom exceptions or a general exception. So you can deal with in this many ways. Now he can also ask you what are the different types of exceptions. So you need to be aware of the exception hierarchy right from the throwable, the topmost class, till the checked exception, unchecked exception, errors, or all of them. So you need to be aware of the hierarchy, so that in order to answer this. Now in this case, as I mentioned, throwable is the topmost class, after that exception, and then it is going to be categorized into checked exception and unchecked exception. Now unchecked exceptions are called runtime exceptions. Then you add, if it the opposite of exceptions are errors, which are like we've already discussed out of memory exception, which we are going to handle it. It is something which the compiler suddenly faces when it at the runtime. Now let's take an example. If you see the try catch block where I'm trying to open some file, now if you see here the IO exception, this is an checked exception, because the compiler is enforcing that this particular exception has to be handled at the compile time. Now at the compile time only it will give you an error if you don't handle this, or either if you are not catching this by the calling method. So either way you have to handle this, and until that you are not handling it, the compiler will not compile the code and you will not be able to run the program. Now there is an important keyword which is called transient keyword. Now suddenly he might throw a question to you saying, can you explain me what is transient? Now his intent must be to understand whether you are aware of the concept of serialization or not, and indirectly he will ask you that. So you need from this particular question he might slowly go to that particular serialization process. If you answer this, definitely he will be ensure that you are aware of the serialization process and the deserialization process. Now this is used in context of marking certain fields that has not to be serialized. So let's say you wanted to serialize some objects to a byte stream, and that can be later reconstructed. So in that case you want certain fields. Let's say in your user details you doesn't want your password to be stored up, or to be stored in the bytecode. So in that case what you will do, you will mark that as a transient, so that when you're trying to store that, your password is not stored over there. So you can remove that using the transient. Now this is quite important because this is one of the basics questions, and when it comes to memory optimization, or when it comes to performance management, so this is quite important. You need to aware of like what is the difference between string, and what is the difference between string builder and string buffer. Now if you are aware, string is something which is going to be the immutable class, and it is going to be the thread safe. Now it comes to string builder. Now this is not thread safe. You can use it in a single threaded environment only, and it is quite faster because it is not going to be synchronized, or it is not dealing with synchronization process. But when it comes to string buffer, it is thread safe, and it is little bit slow because now it has to handle the synchronization process, and multiple threads can work on it. Now he might jump from Java basic concepts to Spring Boot. So make sure your basics are covered up, your advanced topics are covered up, your configuration related things, integration process, everything with respect to the Spring Boot. Because in Spring Boot literally there are thousands of questions which can be asked up. Now in this case he asked about like what kind of validations are you using in Spring Boot. Now this question was asked related to validation. Now why validations is required when you are dealing with Spring Boot? So let's take an example. You have a DTO where you wanted to have some validation to related to some field, let's say email. Now it should not be null. It should have some specific characters like @null, annotation is there, then you have dot. So you have to that particular string character in order to for the correct email. So these particular validations you can introduce using that particular annotation, and with the help of this validation framework we can make use of it. So when you are dealing with the request, when the request lands on your particular request, so it is going to first validate it using @valid, and then it is going to cover that. So when your request body comes from the client side to the server, it lands over there itself without calling that particular controller method, the service or the next layer of things. The validation itself happen at the controller level. Therefore if some thing is missing, or some validations or some input is given wrong, the code will not flow further. It will revert there itself with the validation. So this is what the validation we use it. Now how do you do the custom validations? You can create your interface, that specific annotations created. Now you want to, let's say, define an alphanumeric characteristic validations. So in that case you can define this annotations. So these are required for your annotation to be enabled up and also to be created. Now then you can use the implementation where you can implement this concentrated validator, where you can define this particular alphanumeric and then have that particular implementation. So you can use this is valid over there and try to implement this. In this case you can check out like whether it is valid or matching or not, or this kind of validation you can check it. Now here you have given the regular expression over here which is going to first match up, and if it is going to return that. So if it is not matching, it is going to return that particular validation. Now this is quite important because whenever you are dealing with application, or whether you are working in a project, the database is quite important, and how do you connect to the database is quite important. So he might try to understand whether you have worked with the database and what kind of database and what configuration needs to be done. So let's tomorrow, like you're working on their project, right? So it could be very easy for you to integrate and run it if you are aware of this particular concept. So make sure you prepare this. Now in order to integrate, you need to first have that particular things to be enabled, that is using the Spring Data JPA, which is going to be a suitable for communication between the application and the database. Now to answer the question, right, you can answer by saying first you need to add the dependencies in the pom.xml. So you can define this data JPA starter, and then the database. Specifically here actually I have mentioned S2, but it can be MySQL, Oracle, DynamoDB, etc. So in that case you have to add those particular dependencies. Then comes in your application.properties or YML, you need to configure this particular details, the URL, the database, driver, password, and DDL as an auto, like update, create, etc. And if you want to view the SQL queries which are getting fired up, you can enable this. Now after you do that, you have to map that particular table with that particular entity. So you can define these particular annotations to map that particular specific fields. Then comes your defining the repository. So whenever you have an entity, there should be a repository to interact with that particular database, and Spring Data JPA does using the repository. So you have to create by extending an interface called JPA repository or CRUD repository or pagination and sorting repository. Depends on your requirement, you can define those. Then at the service layer, you need to define your service which is going to take the user repository thing and implement it. So here in this repository you will have all the CRUD operation to be done up. So here if you see, let's say you want to create a user. Now in this case I'm going to call the save method of, because this is one way to save it using the repository. Now let's say you want to return, so in that case find all. So you can have this implementation, you can find by, you can return some element. So in that case you have to implement that, you can explain to the interviewer. Now when you're dealing with REST API, Spring Boot application, then you need to be aware of what are the different HTTP status codes present, and what when you're trying to return as a response to when you're developing a REST API, you are trying to return the response. So in that case you need to give a clear indication whether the client has, the server has processed the request, it has returned it, it has processed it, or there are some client side the inputs validation is not sent properly, or there is a server side problem, or there, let's say you have some unauthorized things. So validation has to happen, and also a proper response has to be sent to the client, whichever it is calling. Now in this case, when you deal with this 200 series, it is going to be that yes, the request has been processed and it is completely successfully executed. So it might return 200, 201, or any other number of 200 series, so that it is successfully accepted and processed. Now 400, it means that you have some let's say you are sending some request. In that particular request there is something wrong at the client side itself. So the request has to be modified so that it is as per the contract on the server or the application you have written. Now it might be 401 unauthorized. So this is something related to the security aspect, where you are not authorized to access that particular functionality. Or there might be 404, which is going to be a client side things, where let's say 404, this resource is not found only. In that case the URL is different, the port is different, or something is wrong in that particular URL itself, and it is unable to find that. Now 500 is something which is going to indicate that some operation or something has failed at the server end. Now it might be anything inside your application. Let's say it must have, the server might be down, or let's say your some logic has not worked as accordingly, so in that case, or let's say you wanted to throw some exception and internal server error you want to throw, in that case you can use this. Now when you're dealing with microservices, Spring Boot, then API gateway is quite important. Now he might ask you what is API gateway and what is the role of it. Now it is going to be a central entry point for any of your microservices which is lying behind your protocol or the behind your firewall. So in that case it is an entry point, and it is going to significantly identify which service is going to run that particular request and process it. So it has that particular information. So the functionalities around API gateway, you will have request routing, you can have authentication and authorization done over there, you can do some rate limiting features enabled so that you can limit that particular service to some number of requests. You can also do some aggregation where the request will be sent up and then it will be taken up that data from different services and aggregate it and send it as a response. So this all mechanism or the functionality can be implemented at the API gateway. Now if you take for AWS there is an API gateway, we can have Spring Cloud, there is a different then there are different providers who provide the API gateway. So based on that you can use it in your microservice architecture. Now distributed transaction, this is quite important when it comes to microservices. The question he might ask you, what is saga design pattern, or let's say he wanted to he will give you a scenario where he says there are 10 different microservices and I wanted to maintain the consistency across my databases and across my services. How can I do that? So when you're dealing with distributed systems, and especially you wanted to maintain the atomicity, the asset properties that is going to be with respect to the database, you have to make sure to use the saga design pattern. Now in that there are two kinds of implementation, one is choreography and one is orchestration. Now let's say you want your service to listen to certain events and process, in that case you can use choreography. And in that case, let's say you want some central service or a coordinator to handle all the transaction and then ultimately deal that complexity and manage the flow, then you can use orchestration. You can actually initiate a compensating transaction if there is some issue or a failure which has happened. So in that case you can compensate that particular transaction with another event or something like that. Now what is conditional annotation in Spring Boot? This is quite important because this is going to conditionally, on the condition basis, it is going to load certain beans which is going to be based on the environment or some environment class path or properties defined in it. So make sure you are using this annotation in a required place, because based on certain condition whatever you have written, that particular bean will either be enabled or disabled because on that particular condition if it is satisfying. Now Spring Boot internally make use of this a lot when it is trying to deal with the auto configuration, what kind of things are there in your class path, what kind of classes or dependencies you have added, what kind of configuration details you have in your property files. So based on that it is going to check that and load that particular classes which are required and then create it. Now how do you optimize your Spring Boot application? He wanted to understand, he might ask you indirectly, my application is performing very slow. Now I wanted to understand how can I improve my application performance that is running in the production. Now you can make use of certain techniques you can disable some unused auto configuration which are unnecessary. You can use of lazy initialization process where you are trying to you can enable it as a lazy so that you're not trying to load everything at the start of your application. You can reduce your scanning of that particular using the @component scanning and define the specific package or exclude certain packages where you unnecessarily doesn't want to load it whenever it is not required. Now you can use different log levels to understand what went wrong, where exactly it is going some issues, so you can make use of that. You can also make use of optimizing your SQL queries. You can actually use some logger tracing mechanism to understand where exactly. So Splunk is there, ELK stack is there to understand what went wrong, what exactly you will be able to from the log levels. Now we already discussed, like, if you want to perform some query optimization, what are these techniques you need to enable. Let's say your application is performing very slow. Now you need to understand how you need to improvise it. The first thing when you're dealing with database is indexing. So when whatever column is being frequently accessed, and then let's say in that particular table there are millions of records, so in that case what you will do, in that case you will see that this particular column is frequently accessed, so you will apply a indexing on that, and then you can create an index on that. So indexing will improve your retrieval process. It will apply certain logic inside that particular table and sort it based on that particular columns, rows, and then it will retrieve it in a faster way. Then you can use of the pagination mechanism. You can limit something, you can do pageable, so you can apply that at the application level, you can apply that at the SQL level. Now you can use the distributed caching as well, where you can actually make use of the Spring Cache, Redis as an implementation, where frequently accessed data can be stored up, where you doesn't need to call that particular database every time in order to get that data. You can once load that, update it, the data, and keep it somewhere. Or else, let's say at a frequent, let's say in a certain duration of the time your application data gets changed up, in that case you can make use of that cache and load that data. Then you have to use that particular native SQL queries when you're dealing with, when JPL is going to be inefficient. So let's say your JPL is taking too much of load to convert that and process that. So in that case you can directly write that native queries to improve the performance. Now at the very end he was asked about writing the SQL question. He was asked, like, can you write a program to fetch the bottom 3 salaries of an employee. Now he was given a table. Now in this case what he have done is that you can answer it by using a limit, or either you can use the row num feature. So in this case, if you see, there is a distinct applied on that salary on that particular table, and then you see the order is in the ascending order of the salary, and then I have only limited those to that particular 3. So the first 3 bottom things are coming as a thing over here. Now you see, this is the limit which you have been able to do that. Now you will see same is going to be with the subquery, where I've used a distinct salary employee ascending order, and then I have restricted to that particular 3 number of rows only. So this is how you can achieve that. Now I hope I was able to explain you each and every question in details, and how you can answer this particular question if same set of questions are asked you. I hope I was able to shed some light on the questions which are asked, and it has helped you. So if this video was helpful, please subscribe to my channel, because I am going to publish lot of videos with respect to the interview, the basic concepts, the practical questions. If this video was helpful, please share it with the needy people. Also, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon. Thank you for watching.